Oregon in November is a specific kind of dark, not the clean, cold dark of the high plains, but something greener and heavier, the dark of a place where things grow year-round, whether you want them to or not, where the forest presses against the edges of every cleared field as though it has been waiting patiently for whoever is farming it to lose their nerve and go. Della Marsh rides the last 4 miles to Coldridge Farm in a light rain that has been falling since she left the main road, her coat already soaked through at the shoulders, her horse picking a careful path through mud that has the quality of something not merely wet, but actively reluctant to be crossed. She has been in Oregon territory for 3 weeks, having come west after her husband's death with the specific intention of finding land cheap enough that $6 could buy it outright, which is not easy in most places and turned out to be entirely possible in this one for reasons the county clerk conveyed with his eyes rather than his words when he stamped her deed. She sees the farm emerge from the tree line the way things emerge from Oregon forest, gradually, and then all at once, a cleared field first, then the shape of a barn, then the house behind it, both buildings dark with the particular darkness of structures that have been rained on for decades and have absorbed the weather into themselves the way old wood does, deeply and permanently. The house is larger than she expected and older looking, its timbers hand-hewn rather than milled, the work of someone who built with an intention of permanence rather than expediency. She notes this with the eye of a woman who has learned in recent months to read buildings the way other people read faces, quickly and for evidence of what the surface is not saying. This building is saying it was built to last. It is not saying why it has been empty for the past 9 years, or why it has changed hands 11 times in the 58 years since its original builder died in it, or why the current asking price for a property this solid on land this good is $6, which is what Della paid. She lets herself in through the front door and stands in the entry hall with her lamp raised and finds, before she finds anything else, the name carved into the right-hand doorframe of the entry hall in letters perhaps 2 inches high, deep and deliberate, cut into the wood with something sharp and certain. Harlan. She runs her fingers along it, feeling the clean edges of the cuts, the letters evenly spaced, the work of a person who knew exactly what they were doing and had done it before. She moves through to the kitchen and finds it again in the doorframe between the entry and the kitchen. The same hand, the same depth, the same letters. Harlan. She checks every doorframe in the house before she lights the stove, and she finds it in all of them. The kitchen to the parlor to the hallway to each of the 3 bedrooms, the back door leading out to the porch. She counts 8 interior doorframes and finds the name in all 8. She goes out to the barn in the rain and finds it there too, carved into the wide timber frame of the barn's main entrance and into the frame of each of the 3 stalls inside. 11 doorframes in total, 11 carvings of the same name in what appears to be the same hand. She lights the stove and makes herself a meal and sits at the kitchen table and looks at the carving in the kitchen doorframe while she eats, trying to simply look at it the way she looks at any feature of a house she has just acquired, as information rather than portent. It is old. It is intentional. The person who made it had a name, and the name was Harlan, and the name is now in every doorway in this farm. She considers the possible explanations available to a practical woman who has just paid $6 for a property in Oregon territory and is not yet prepared to entertain the impractical ones. Someone built this farm and carved their name in it as a mark of ownership or pride or simply habit, and the name has been here ever since, weathering with the wood, and nothing about it is more remarkable than the name of a shipyard carved into the timbers of a ship. This is a perfectly adequate explanation. She holds it in her mind and turns it over and finds that it holds together on all sides the way a good explanation should. She goes to bed moderately satisfied with it and lies in the dark, listening to the Oregon rain and the settling of the old timber around her, and she is very nearly asleep when she hears it. A slow, deliberate sound, like a fingernail drawn carefully along wood, tracing something, coming from the direction of the bedroom door, the door she has left closed against the draft of the hallway. It lasts perhaps 10 seconds and then stops. She lies in the dark, listening to the silence that follows and does not get up, telling herself it is the house settling, the wood contracting in the damp cold, the ordinary sounds of an old building adjusting to a new occupant's warmth. She believes this with about half of her available conviction and falls asleep eventually with the other half still listening. The carvings are old. The wood around them has weathered and darkened and settled in ways that make clear the letters have been there for a very long time, not added recently by some previous occupant making a peculiar mark of their own tenure. She thinks about the name Harlan. She has seen no such name in the property records she reviewed before the purchase. No Harlan among the 11 owners listed in the county's chain of title, going back to 1831, when the property was first recorded under the name of someone whose entry in the ledger is so faded, the clerk had to squint to read it back to her. She had not asked him to try harder. She wishes, standing in the barn in the Oregon rain, that she had. She sleeps her first night in the house more lightly than she would like, not from fear exactly, but from the accumulated alertness of a person who has found 11 carved names in a house she just paid $6 for and would like to understand what they mean before she fully commits to rest. The house is sound and dry, and the rain on the roof has the quality of a sound she could learn to sleep through, given time. She is most of the way toward actual sleep when she hears it, a sound from the direction of the bedroom door, the door she has left closed against the draft of the hallway, a slow, deliberate sound, like a fingernail drawn carefully along wood, tracing something. It lasts perhaps 10 seconds, and then stops. She lies in the dark, listening to the silence that follows, and does not get up, telling herself it is the house settling, the wood contracting in the damp cold, the ordinary sounds of an old building adjusting to a new occupant's warmth. She believes this with about half of her available conviction, and falls asleep, eventually with the other half still listening. In the morning, she examines the bedroom doorframe carefully in the gray light from the window and finds the carving she already knew was there, Harlan, in the same hand as all the others, worn smooth with age at its highest points where hands have touched it over decades. She runs her finger along it and finds nothing new, no fresh cuts added in the night to whatever was already there. The sound she heard was the house settling. She is relatively certain of this. She goes downstairs and makes coffee and begins the work of the day and does not think about the door frames again until evening, when she is carrying her lamp through the hallway and the lamplight falls on the carving in the hall door frame at the angle that makes the letters stand out most clearly, and she stops and looks at it for a moment and has the specific and unwelcome thought that this name has been in this wood for nearly 60 years and is not going anywhere, and that she is going to have to decide at some point what kind of relationship she intends to have with it. Rowan Dell rides up on her 6th day A man from the timberline spread 2 miles north, who has the look of someone who has been watching the access road for signs of habitation and has come over as soon as there was smoke from the chimney to confirm what the smoke suggested. He sits his horse at the yard's edge in the familiar way, studying the house rather than the yard first, his gaze going specifically to the front door frame before it goes anywhere else. "You settled in at Coldridge," he says when she comes to meet him. Not quite a question. "I have," she says. He nods slowly. "You found the door frames," he says. She tells him she found them the first evening. He nods again, with the expression of a man receiving a report that confirms what he expected. "You should know," he says eventually, "that you are not the first person to find them. Every person who has taken this property in the last 50 years has found them." He pauses. "You should also know that most of them have found other things besides." She asks him, "What other things?" He is quiet for a moment, choosing his words with the careful economy of a man who has learned that imprecision in this particular subject creates more difficulty than it resolves. "The sounds," he says finally. "Door frames at night." He describes what she already heard on her first night, the slow, deliberate, dragging sound, like a fingernail or a tool drawn along wood, like someone carefully tracing the letters already cut there. He has heard it himself, he says, on 2 occasions when he stayed late at the farm helping a previous owner who asked for company. And he is not a man given to imagination or to claiming experiences he cannot account for, which is why he has thought about what he heard on those 2 occasions fairly continuously for the past 4 years, and has not arrived at an explanation that satisfies him. She invites him in for coffee, and they sit at the kitchen table with the carving in the doorframe visible from where both of them are seated, and she asks him what he knows about who Harlan was, where he came from, what the original record of him says. Rowan knows less than she hopes, which is to say, he knows the outlines only. The basic facts that circulate in a county's oral history around a property with this kind of reputation, the name in the doorframes, the brief tenures, the consistent pattern of departure. He does not know how Harlan died. Nobody in the county seems to know how Harlan died, which Rowan finds, he admits, more unsettling than the doorframes. A man leaves his name in every doorway of his house, and nobody records what became of him. There is something in that gap, in the space between the careful permanence of the carvings and the complete absence of any account of the man's end, that Rowan has never been able to think around. He tells her there is an old woman in the nearest town, Ida Creed, who is the last surviving descendant of the man whose name is in every doorframe. He tells her she should talk to Ida before she does anything else. He offers to take her there. She says she will go tomorrow. He nods and waters his horse and rides out without asking whether she is frightened, which she appreciates because the answer is complicated and she is not ready to give it yet. She goes to the doorframes that evening with her lamp and a magnifying glass she finds in the parlor among the previous occupants' abandoned things, and she examines each carving in turn, methodically, the way she approaches every problem that does not yield immediately to common sense. The letters are consistent across all 11 frames. Same depth, same spacing, same particular way of cutting the crossbar of the H, slightly longer on the right side than the left. The small, unconscious signature of an individual hand that repeats itself the same way across a lifetime of work. One person cut all of these. The same person in all 11 locations. She notes this in the ledger she has already begun keeping. The same kind of careful record she kept of her husband's medical expenses, and then his debts, and then the settlement of them, because documentation is the closest thing to control that most situations allow. She examines the frames for a long time that evening, moving through the house with her lamp and her magnifying glass crouching at each one, looking not just at the letters, but at the wood around them, trying to read the history of the carving in the way the grain has grown around the cut over decades, the way the weathering differs between the deepest cuts and the shallower details, the way the surface of the wood has accumulated the oils of hands that have passed over it in 60 years of people moving through these doorways. What she finds when she has examined all 11 frames twice is that she likes him. Harlan Creed, whoever he was, cut his name into these door frames with the handwriting of a person who knew what they were doing and cared about doing it well, and she finds she has a kind of respect for that, the respect one careful person has for the work of another careful person, even across a distance of decades, and the considerable complication of what the work has subsequently done. What she notices next, crouching with her lamp at the kitchen doorframe, takes her a moment to process. The carving she is looking at is deep and old and entirely consistent with the others, but beside it, in the wood, just to the right of the final N, there is a mark she missed in her first examination, smaller than the letters, barely visible without the lamp held at the right angle. A single vertical line, scratched shallowly, the kind of mark a person makes when they are keeping count. She moves to the parlor doorframe and finds the same mark, a single vertical scratch beside the carved name. She checks all 11 frames and finds the scratch marks on 9 of them, always beside the name, always shallow, always as though added later by the same hand. On 2 of the frames, the scratch mark is not a single line, but 2. On 1 frame, the bedroom door frame, where she heard the sound on her first night, there are 3. Ida Creed lives at the edge of the nearest settlement in a house small enough to suggest she has been living carefully for a very long time, and she receives Della and Rowan with the particular composure of a woman who has been expecting this visit in the abstract for years, even if she did not know today would be the specific day of it. She is past 80, her hands gnarled and still, her eyes carrying the specific clarity of a person who has simplified their life down to the things that genuinely matter and found the result unexpectedly peaceful. She was not close to Harlan Creed herself. She tells Della he died in 1831, which was 40 years before she was born. And what she knows of him, she knows from her grandmother's account and her grandmother's mother's account before that, the oral record of a family that left the farm in a hurry and never returned to it, but never quite managed to stop talking about why. Harlan Creed built Coldridge Farm with his own hands in the spring of 1828, she says. He was a man who believed in ownership in the specific, physical sense, believed that a thing was yours because you had put your hands on it and your mark on it and your years into it, and he carved his name into every doorframe in the house and barn as the last act of construction in each building, the way another man might hang a horseshoe or bury a coin under the foundation stone. It was not superstition, his descendants always maintained. It was simply Harlan's way of saying, "This is mine, and I built it, and my name will be here when I am not." He died in the winter of 1831. The records say by accident, though the details of the accident were never clearly recorded and have not survived in any document Ida has been able to find in 40 years of looking. What the family history records is that after his death the farm passed to his brother, who lasted 1 season, and to the brother's son, who lasted 2 years, and to a series of buyers from outside the family thereafter, none of whom stayed long enough to become part of the story. The family stopped trying to hold it after the 2nd generation, gave up on it, but they also, Ida says, never managed to fully let it go, because the name was still in the wood, And as long as the name was in the wood, there was the sense that Harlan was still in some way the farm's proper owner, whatever the county record said. Della asks about the scratch marks. She describes what she found: the vertical lines beside the carved names, 1 or 2 or 3 depending on the frame, added in what appears to be the same hand as the original letters. Ida is quiet for a moment, her gnarled hands folded on the table before her. Then she says that her grandmother's account mentioned something she herself has never known what to make of. That when the brother went back to the farm to retrieve some property after Harlan's death, he found fresh marks in the wood beside the carved names, marks that had not been there the previous autumn when Harlan was still alive. He assumed it was Harlan's own work, done in the weeks before his death. He did not look closely enough to count them or to understand them as a count. Della tells her there are 3 marks on the bedroom door frame. Ida says she does not know what that means. She says she is not certain she wants to know. She says that whatever Harlan left in those door frames when he built the farm, whatever of himself he managed to put into the wood alongside the letters of his name, she believes it has been there continuously since 1831, doing whatever it is that a man's mark does when the man himself is no longer there to tend it. She says she is glad, after all these years, that someone is finally living in the farm again who seems inclined to try to understand it, rather than simply running from it. She is 83 years old, she says, and she would like the matter settled before she dies, even if settled only means someone choosing to stay rather than the mystery being actually resolved. She says this last sentence carefully, with the precision of a woman who has thought about the difference between those two things for a very long time and understands that the second is probably not available, but the first very much is, and that the first might, in the end, be enough. Della rides home with Rowan in the Oregon rain and does not speak much, turning over in her mind the image of a man who built a farm to last and carved his name into every door frame to say so, and who has apparently, for nearly 60 years, been attempting to continue doing so in some form that the farm and its succession of uneasy owners never found a way to accommodate. The human trouble, when it comes, arrives in the form of August Finch of the Finch Timber Company, who presents himself at the farm on her second week in a manner that could be mistaken for courtesy by someone who did not notice the particular calculation visible behind his pleasantness. He is interested in the farm, he explains, specifically in the 40 acres of mature timber on the property's northern boundary, which his surveys suggest represent a commercially significant stand of Douglas fir that his company would find extremely useful. He names a figure. She declines it. He receives her refusal with the patience of a man who has decided she will come around eventually and is simply marking time until she does. His gaze moves before he leaves toward the door frames of the house, the front entry frames specifically, where Harlan is most deeply cut and most visible. He looks at it for a moment longer than any innocent curiosity would require. She notices this and says nothing, filing it away in the ledger she is already keeping. She keeps 2 ledgers side by side during the weeks that follow, one for the human trouble, one for the human trouble, which escalates predictably into nighttime riders at the timber stand's edge, and fresh-cut stumps found each morning that represent trees she did not authorize anyone to fell, and one for the other trouble, and one for the other trouble, which does not escalate so much as deepen. The scratch marks are the key, she has decided, and she spends her evenings studying them with the magnifying glass and recording their dimensions and their placement with the patience of a woman who has committed to understanding something fully or not at all. She discovers, in her 3rd week, that the scratch marks are not all old. 2 of the frames have marks that the surrounding wood has not yet darkened around in the way that the original carving and even the oldest scratches have darkened. Marks whose edges are still pale and relatively sharp cut rather than weathered and soft. She cannot say when these newer marks were made. She can say that they were not made by anyone who has lived in this farm in the past 9 years. And she can say that they are in the same hand as all the others. And she sits with those 2 facts for a long evening before she adds them to the ledger with the same steady handwriting she uses for everything else. She also begins in these weeks to map the nightly sounds more carefully than she did in the first weeks when she was still trying to decide whether to be frightened by them. She has a pocket watch she keeps on the nightstand, and she lies awake on the nights when the sound is active and times its movement through the house, recording which frame it appears to originate from, how long it stays, where it goes next. What she establishes over 3 weeks of this kind of observation is that the sound moves in a consistent direction, front to back, entry to kitchen to parlor to hall to bedrooms, and that it appears at each frame for roughly the same duration before moving on, as though it is giving each frame the same amount of attention, which is what you would do if what you were doing was maintenance rather than exploration. She writes the word maintenance in the ledger and looks at it for a while before deciding to leave it there. It is the most accurate word she has. The nightly scratching from the door frames becomes, over these weeks, a sound she has moved through all the stages of response to. She began afraid of it, then alert to it, then studying it, timing its duration and its location in the house on any given night, whether it seems to come from a specific frame or seems to move through the house over the course of an evening. She has established after 3 weeks of observation that it moves. It begins most nights at the front entry frame and travels through the house in the order of the rooms, ending most frequently at the bedroom door frame, where it is quietest and briefest, as though whatever produces it is less interested in the sleeping room than in the spaces through which people move during the day. She has also established that it is louder on nights when she has been through a door frame multiple times during the day, which may mean nothing, or may mean that the activity above the frame is in some way responsive to the activity below it, which is a thought she has written down in the ledger and then looked at for a long time without being able to decide how she feels about it. She takes the evidence of unauthorized timber cutting to Rowan, and together they take it to the deputy in the nearest town, a woman named Frances Aldicott, who proves to be, by fortunate coincidence, someone with a specific and long-standing interest in the Finch Timber Company's habit of expanding its operations informally onto land it does not own. The investigation that follows moves faster than Della expected, partly because Frances Aldicott has been waiting for exactly this kind of documented complaint, and partly because Finch's crews left sufficient physical evidence of their work at the timber stand that no amount of his company's considerable legal resources can make it disappear. Finch comes to see her once before the trial on a gray December morning, riding alone rather than in his carriage, and the informality of his approach tells her he has recalibrated his understanding of how this conversation is likely to go. He is still courteous, still measured, still the same soft-spoken man she first met. But beneath the courtesy there is now a quality she has not heard from him before, a careful quality, as though he is considering his words, not for their persuasive effect, but for their accuracy, which is different. He tells her he is prepared to improve his offer substantially. She tells him she is not selling. He receives this with a nod that contains, for the first time, no residual confidence that she will eventually change her mind. Before he rides out, he stops at the entry door frame and looks at the carving there. Harlan, the same glance he gave it on his first visit, and she watches him look at it and sees something in his expression. she did not see before, something that is not curiosity and not calculation, but something closer to a reluctant respect for whatever that name has managed to persist through across 60 years of people trying to move on from it. He rides away, and she closes the door and stands in the hall with her lamp and looks at the carving too, and thinks that she and Finch are perhaps the only two people in the county who have looked at that name recently enough and carefully enough to understand what it has actually accomplished, which is remarkable in its own quiet way. The trial, when it comes, goes badly for Finch, as trials tend to go when the evidence includes fresh stumps, company-marked equipment, and the testimony of 3 neighboring landowners who have been similarly troubled by the same informal expansions and have been waiting for someone to be the first to bring it to court. He is fined heavily, his timber rights in the county suspended for a period of years, and he does not speak to Della again after the verdict. The weeks after the verdict are the first weeks since her arrival that Della can give her full attention to the farm itself, its needs and its potential, without dividing it constantly between the legitimate and the illegitimate pressures on her time. Rowan stays close in the way that has become simply the rhythm of their days, and the rhythm has settled, without either of them having specifically decided it, into something that both of them understand is not merely practical. She continues her observations of the door frames, the nightly scratching, the scratch marks the question of what Harlan Creed left in this wood when he built this farm and what it has been doing in the 60 years since he died. She has a theory she has been developing for some weeks, which she has written out in the ledger and reread several times to see whether it survives rereading, and it does, which she takes as a reasonable sign that it is at least coherent, even if she cannot determine whether it is true. Her theory is this: Harlan Creed built this farm with a specific intention, which was permanence, which was that this place would remain his in the most fundamental sense, regardless of what the county records said, and that the carving of his name into the doorframes was not merely symbolic, but was, in whatever way such things can be real, actually effective, that whatever of Harlan persists in this wood has been doing continuously since 1831 the same thing he did when he built it, which is moving through the farm, asserting ownership, tracing the letters of his name in the frames of his doors, marking the count of something Della cannot identify, but which the number of scratch marks suggests he has been counting for a very long time. She does not know what this makes him. She does not know what this makes the farm. She knows that she has lived here for several months now, and that nothing has harmed her, and that the sound from the door frames, which she once found frightening, she now finds simply present, the way a creek sound is present, background, and consistent and belonging to the place rather than threatening it. She knows that the farm is good land, and that she intends to stay on it, and that staying on it means making her own accommodation with whatever accommodation Harlan has already made with the 60 years of people who have moved through his door frames since he built them. Rowan asks her to marry him on a clear evening in late December, standing in the kitchen doorway where Harlan is carved into the frame on his left, and the warm light of the kitchen is on his face, and the cold Oregon evening is at his back. And she says yes, in the specific unhesitating way that a woman says yes when she has already known the answer for longer than the question has been formally asked. They plan the wedding for the spring at the farm because there is no other place it could reasonably be. Some in town have opinions about this, about the farm and its reputation and the name and the door frames, and Della receives these opinions with the equanimity of a woman who has spent a winter in close observation of something most people prefer to simply be afraid of, and has arrived, through that observation, at a relationship with it that those people are not in a position to understand or evaluate. Before the wedding, she does something she has been considering for weeks, which is to add her own mark to the door frames alongside Harlan's. Not a carving, not words, not a name. She uses a small chisel and a careful hand, and she cuts a single thin line beside the name in the entry hall door frame, the first door frame, the most prominent one, placed close to but distinct from the existing marks so that anyone looking will see clearly that it is not the same hand. She chooses the entry hall frame deliberately. The first frame Harlan carved when he finished the house, the one where his name is deepest and most confident, the work of a man who had just completed something and was marking it as finished and his. She makes her own line there small and precise, and stands back and looks at it beside his name and thinks about what it means to add your mark to a place that already has someone else's mark in it, and whether that is presumption or simply the natural accumulation of a place across the people who have genuinely belonged to it, and decides that it is the latter and that she is glad she did it. The wedding is held in late April, warm enough for the yard, but with the Oregon dampness that never entirely leaves the air. Attended by a modest gathering that includes Rowan's people from Timberline and the Deputy Frances Aldicott and Ida Creed, who makes the journey despite her age and sits through the ceremony with the expression of a woman watching something she has wanted to see for a very long time finally happen. The afternoon passes with the specific warmth of a day that everyone present can feel is significant even if they could not all articulate precisely why. And by the time the guests have gone and the yard is quiet and Della and Rowan stand alone in the spring evening, she finds herself looking at the front door frame, at Harlan carved deep and permanent in the timber, and at the thin line she added beside it, already beginning to show the first faint darkening at its edges. That means the wood is starting to accept it. That night she hears the scratching from the entry hall, faint and deliberate exactly as she has heard it every night since her arrival, moving through the house in its customary order from front to back. She lies in the dark beside Rowan and listens to it travel from the entry to the kitchen to the parlor to the hallway and finally to the bedroom door, where it pauses, as it always does, in its briefest and quietest iteration. And then, something she has not heard before, after the bedroom door, after the customary pause, the sound continues. Not scratching this time, something lighter, something that moves back up the hallway, through the parlor, through the kitchen, back to the entry, and then a pause, a longer pause, at the entry hall frame where she has added her own mark, and then silence. The full circuit of the farm, in reverse, ending where she ended, at the first frame. She lies awake for a long time afterward, not from fear, but from the particular stillness of a person who has just witnessed something she will spend years deciding how to interpret. She adds it to the ledger in the morning in the same steady hand as everything else, dated and timed and described as precisely as she can manage. Spring comes to the Oregon Territory with the particular extravagance of a place where things have been accumulating toward growth all winter in the dark and wet, and Coldridge Farm comes into its season with the kind of productivity that reminds Della why the land was worth building a farm on in the first place, whatever it cost the builder and whoever came after him to hold it. She has plans she has been working out through the winter for the cattle and the cleared fields and the timber stand, which she intends to manage rather than sell, taking from it selectively in the manner of a person who understands that a resource you intend to live with for a long time requires a different relationship than a resource you intend to extract and move on. She and Rowan work the farm together in the long light of the Oregon spring, and the work has the quality of something that has found its proper shape, two people, and a piece of land that suits them, all three settling into the particular rhythm of a long arrangement. She goes out to each doorframe once a week and examines it in the way she has been examining them since November, running her fingers along the carvings, checking for new scratch marks, noting what she finds in the ledger. It has become, she realizes somewhere in the third week of April, not a frightening activity, but simply a chore, one of the regular tasks of maintenance that this particular farm requires in addition to the ordinary ones any farm requires, which is to say it has become part of what she means when she says this is her farm and she takes care of it. She thinks Harlan Creed, whose mark she is inspecting when she does this, would probably find this arrangement satisfactory in the specific and physical understanding of ownership he seemed to have. She finds it satisfactory herself. It is, in any case, the truth of how things stand at Coldridge Farm in the spring of 1890, and she has always found the truth of how things stand to be a more comfortable place to live than any available alternative. On the morning of their first full month of marriage, Della walks out to the barn to begin her chores and finds, on the wide timber frame of the barn's main entrance, beside the deeply cut original carving of Harlan, a second carving, fresh-cut wood, pale and sharp-edged beneath it, clearly made recently, certainly not there the last time she examined this frame, which was 3 days prior, a single letter D, cut in the same hand as all the other letters she has spent a winter studying, with the same depth and the same deliberate quality, the crossbar angled in the same characteristic way. She stands before it for a long time in the morning light, her hand resting against the barn frame, feeling the new cut and the old cut side by side beneath her fingers, the deep weathered grooves of Harlan and the sharp pale edges of D, 60 years of Oregon weather between the two marks. She goes back inside and makes coffee and drinks it at the kitchen table with the entry hall door frame visible through the open doorway. Harlan in the wood where it has always been. And she thinks about Harlan Creed, who built this farm in 1828 and carved his name into every door frame and died here in the winter of 1831 and has apparently, for the 58 years since, been maintaining his claim on this place in the only way still available to him. She thinks about Ida Creed, 83 years old, saying she would like the matter settled before she dies. And she thinks about what settled might mean for a situation like this one, for a man whose name is cut deeper into this wood than any weather has managed to remove it, and who has, it appears, just added her initial beside it. She thinks this is probably the closest thing to settled that any of it is going to get, and that settled is not resolution but accommodation. 2 names in the same barn frame, one 60 years old and one 3 days old, the farm's original owner, and its current one, side by side in the timber. She goes back out to the barn frame after her coughing, and she stands before the 2 carvings, and she runs her finger along the new D, feeling its edges, and then she runs her finger along the old Harlan, and she says, out loud to the empty barn and the Oregon morning and whatever else might be listening, that she is going to stay. She says it not because she thinks it needs to be said or because she believes whoever might be listening did not already know it, but because saying it out loud in the clear morning air makes it more fully real in the way that only spoken things sometimes achieve. Then she goes to do her chores, and the morning is ordinary and good, and the farm is hers in the specific and physical sense that Harlan Creed understood ownership to mean, which is that her hands are on it, and her mark is in it, and her years from this day forward are going into it. And that is what belonging to a place means, and she intends, as she believes he intended when he built this place from the forest and carved his name into every doorway for it to last. She writes it in a ledger that evening, the carving, the date, the dimensions of the letter, its placement relative to the existing name, the quality of the cut. She writes it all down precisely in the same steady handwriting she has used for everything since she arrived at Coldridge Farm. And she sets the ledger on the shelf beside Margaret's notebooks. No, she corrects herself in her own mind. She has no notebooks that belong to anyone else. She sets the ledger on the shelf beside her own previous ledgers, the record of the human trouble and its resolution, and the months of observation she has been keeping, and she looks at the shelf with its row of careful documentation and understands that she is building, without having planned to, the same kind of record that the people who cared most about this place have always eventually built, a record of what it is and what it does and what it does, and what it requires of the person who lives on it. She does not know how long she will be here. She knows that when she is not here any longer, whatever of Harlan persists in these doorframes will still be maintaining its claim, and that whoever comes next will find, carved in the barn door beside Harlan, the letter D, already beginning to weather in the Oregon rain, already on its way to becoming as permanent as everything else. Harlan Creed built to last.